Hi people, it's Archivist here, and today I'm going to be going through Star Wars episodes 1 to 6, doing a little bit of a review for each of them. And this is going to be a bit of a casual, just sit back and relax video. I'm just going to go through, say what I think of them. I mean, this is essentially all began from this fascination, this rekindlement of my enjoyment for the franchise, and it all began with just watching a little bit of Star Wars Battlefront a while back, and after seeing it, I thought, oh yeah, Star Wars, I like Star Wars, god, that was a good thing. And then I thought, you know what film did I really like in the Star Wars series? I liked episode 4, that was good, so I went onto iTunes, I bought it, I watched it, and thought, well, that was good, but I want to see how the series continues. And I went the 5th one, the 6th one, and I thought, well, that was good, but I want more Star Wars, so I'm gonna go back and watch the prequels as well, and I watched all of them. And then I even watched some of the cartoon series because I was just so desperate for more Star Wars. So by this point, my brain is just Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars, and I thought, well, I might as well say a bit of Star Wars. I mean, I've done a bit of Battlefront on the channel, but why not go through the movies? These 6 movies are the core of the Star Wars franchise, and to get me through this, because this might be a longer video, I'm just gonna have a little bit of my Coca-Cola beverage. That's good cola. Okay, so the first one, episode 1, The Phantom Menace, starring Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, and whoever was the motion capture for Jar Jar Binks. And this is essentially, it's very difficult to sum up the plot of this film, but I think what was happening was the Trade Federation were for some reason creating a blockade around the planet of Naboo, and 2 Jedi were sent to do some negotiations, but the negotiations failed, and they realised that the Separatists were planning to invade Naboo, and they wanted the Queen of Naboo to sign some kind of treaty to make the invasion legal, which just sounds strange. And that was the plot of the film. Now, when I first saw The Phantom Menace, I must have been about 4 or 5, very young, so the fact the film had flashy lights, crazy characters, well, one crazy character, lightsabers, an epic score, spaceships, that was enough to get me going. That was fine. That was good enough for 4 or 5-year-old me. And so this is what really brought me into the Star Wars universe, and I really enjoyed it. It was very basic. The fundamentals were good. But now that I've gone back and watched it on iTunes now, I do see a few things that aren't so great about it. And one of those things is the acting in general. It's very bland. I mean, bland is the perfect word to describe it. Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, Natalie Portman, whoever played Little Anakin, they're all just so flat. The emotion doesn't quite come through here. Even when you have emotional moments, there is too much quietness. I think what may have been an issue here was that they wanted to portray the Jedi as these monk-like characters, and monks are quite calm of mind, they're able to control their emotions, but as a result there was no real strong emotions there. I think you saw Ewan McGregor, who was playing Obi-Wan Kenobi, do a bit of a no when Qui-Gon died, but that was really it, and there was a bit of a furious assault he did on Darth Maul, but on the whole it was all just a bit flat. And that's what I do remember about this film, especially Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, God, he was the flattest character. But then to offset that, you've got one character who's very articulated, and that's Jar Jar Binks. But he's just annoying. He's the complete opposite, doing crazy stuff for no reason. I think with Jar Jar Binks, I wouldn't say axe him entirely. I'm not saying I enjoyed him, but the best place to have left him would have been in the Gungan city underwater. So, Jar Jar Binks would have served his purpose. He would have taken the Jedi to the Gungan city. They would have given them that little water submarine thing to go through the planet core, and that would have been, leave him, Jar Jar Binks is done, he's done his little thing. But no, he kind of stays on in the entire film, making silly comments, and I think really that those were the issues, and it comes down to the acting. The plot's also a bit flimsy. There's no, I think it may have been a little bit of complex for its target audience. I mean, I certainly didn't really understand what was going on when I was younger. Only now do I kind of get the framework, but even now I'm a bit like, what really happened there? What was going on? Why did this happen? And I think the coolest thing about this film, and cool is the real best word to describe it, is Darth Maul and his double-bladed lightsaber, and that fight at the end, the Duel of Fates. That's very interesting to watch and very well choreographed. I mean, very good, spectacular, really fast, and you know, they are I'm pretty sure those were the actors doing it. I don't think they were stunt doubles. But it ends so bizarrely where for the entire fight, Darth Maul's had lightning fast reactions. You couldn't fault him. But then at the end, Obi-Wan Kenobi just jumps over his back and he just stands there and gets slashed and falls down a pit and, you know, in two. And you think, where were his reactions then? He could have cut him in half when he jumped over his head, just like in episode 3, but he doesn't. It just breaks it. There needed to be something else to knock him off guard. Maybe if Obi-Wan had force pushed him and then kind of knocked him off guard and then slashed him from behind. But he just jumped over his head. He could easily have slashed him going through the air. That bothers me a lot about the film. But something that I really enjoyed was the pod racing. If you watch that now, the pod racing is a genuinely very thrilling set piece. It's high octane, there's a lot going on, the stakes are quite high, you see people destroyed, and the effects are good. I mean, that is something to be said, the CG effects are pretty good in this film, even considering how old it is now. So the Phantom Menace on the whole, it will appeal to very young kids like I was, but if you watch it now, I can't imagine you really getting into it unless you think lightsabers are just cool for the sake of being lightsabers. I say that to kind of be mocking, but lightsabers are just cool for the sake of being lightsabers. And then you move on to Attack of the Clones, and I didn't actually see this film in cinemas when it came out. I think I saw it later down the line on DVD. I think I rented it. And I have to admit, this is my least favourite of all the Star Wars films, primarily because of Anakin and the actor who plays him. I think his name's like Hayden Christensen, correct me if I'm wrong there, but it's just a lot of whining. He's just whining. It's like they needed to make sure that he seems like he's going to go to the dark side, because the main part of these prequels is to see Anakin grow into Darth Vader. You know, he's at one point he's a good Jedi, but then he goes bad, and he's just whining though. That's not dark. That's not evil. He just whines a lot. I thought it would have been better if he'd actually been a real hero, someone who's always selfless and valiant. Maybe more like Qui-Gon, if anything. But he was just a whiner through the whole film, and and some of the dialogue was so awkward. And the love connection between him and Natalie Portman's character, Padme, was very artificial. It was very difficult to get behind, and I wish that had been rushed over really, or just done differently. It just didn't come across as very genuine. So I didn't like that part of the film, but on the other hand, there were some parts of the film that I did like. I think Obi-Wan Kenobi's character was done way better, a lot better. It's the same actor, Ewan McGregor, but he was clearly just given more focus on by a director. He just wanted him to do more, and he had far more charisma in this film. He was more interesting. He was, unlike the last film, he wasn't just a guy with a blue lightsaber. He was someone worth investing in. I also liked Count Dooku, although he wasn't really in the film that much, way more than Darth Maul, but he could have been in it more, I guess. He came in at about halfway, and he was meant to be this other fallen Jedi, maybe foreshadowing Anakin in a way, and he had Force Lightning, which was all cool, and in fact there were two cool things at the end. There were sort of three. There was Anakin using double lightsabers, although that was like, when did he learn that? And then there was Count Dooku using Force Lightning, pretty cool. And then there was Yoda doing his flipping crazy lightsaber moves. Some people don't like that. I think it's pretty good. It kind of shows how he's able to use the Force not only to move objects telekinetically or to read people's mind, but to actually sort of infuse his own body. So when he's walking around sort of old and decrepit, that's just his natural state, but the Force sort of gives him strength. So that's what I took from it, and I quite liked it. And it was a thrilling fight. Although it is somewhat comical to see Count Dooku just swiping around at this little flying booger, trying to get a slash in with his little lightsaber. But it was definitely worth doing, just to see him flipping around like he's on steroids. And also, I think the Geonosis arena scene was, on the whole, pretty good. Jango Fett wasn't given much of a story here, I think, because the thing is, I'll get onto Boba Fett later, but Jango Fett, I feel like they could have done more of him than just have his head cut off by Mace Windu, and then his son sees him. It felt like they only included Jango in the film as a setup for Boba Fett, who in himself isn't really a big character. He's made out to be more than he is. So that's Attack of the Clones. And then we move on to Episode 3. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Actually, I'm just going to take a quick drink here, because we're at the 10-minute mark. Alright, yeah. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. I think they toned down the Anakin whining a bit in this film, and therefore that made it a lot better. Just based on that, the love story side of it was toned down as well. They still had Obi-Wan Kenobi being a more interesting, more charismatic character. In fact, it feels like, although this isn't a perfect film, they learned from their mistakes in the previous ones, and I genuinely do like Episode 3 quite a lot. I think it's a very thrilling film. It's a competent film with mistakes, but the action is fantastic. The opening scene, I loved that bit. In fact, that whole sequence, right from the beginning up until decapitating Count Dooku, or you could even say crashing onto Coruscant, that is just a great sequence. There are a few boring bits in the middle where Jedis are just discussing things and they can be a bit dull. Something I would mention, and this has been pointed out to me, that's quite obvious, is that I feel like Samuel L. Jackson was horribly miscast as Mace Windu, because Samuel L. Jackson is best when he's like a crazy, unhinged character shouting a lot, but in these films he's meant to be this monk-like character like most of the Jedi are, and so he's forced to be reserved, and you think, well, Samuel L. Jackson, he doesn't really fit that. I feel like someone else could have done that, or they could have made Mace Windu more rogue. I mean, he's got a purple lightsaber, that could, or pink or purple, whatever it was. He could have been like the rogue of the Jedi, far more hot-headed, someone who Anakin's actually aspiring to be, but then goes too far and becomes a Sith, or something like that. And I mean, that takes us on to Anakin's fall. He's a pretty decent guy, right up until this one point where he just goes totally evil. He turns on a dime where he cuts off Mace Windu's hand, and then the Emperor lightnings him out a window. He flies out, and then he says, "What have I done?" as if he's ashamed of what he's done, and yet he just continues to do everything this Dark Lord says, and he just does the craziest things. Like, okay, it's one thing to cut off Mace Windu's hand so that the trying to save Palpatine, and then the Emperor to lighten him out, but then not too long down the line, he's going around killing kids. I mean, that's basically what he does. He goes to the Jedi Temple and kills what they say younglings, but he's basically massacring children, which is, how do you go from being a bit of a dickhead to someone like that? It's such a big jump. And then near the end, he's choking Padme, which is just, I mean, he's barely choked anyone yet, and the first person he chokes is the person he's trying to save for all this. It's too much. It's too crazy. The fight at the end between Obi-Wan and Anakin, it's kind of like it begins charged and like, yeah, fight. We waited to see this the whole time, but it goes on for so long. So when I actually think back to it, I remember the beginning and then I remember the end. I think the end is almost comically sadistic and over the top. Like, Star Wars is at its heart in like a kid's family film, but then you just imagine Anakin burning up with his limbs chopped off, going, "I hate you." You think, is this for kids? This is a bit off. It was quite an extreme. I remember a friend telling me about it before I saw it in the cinema, thinking, oh my god, he's right, that is crazy. Like, that's as much as they could get away with, and he's just burning, and Obi-Wan doesn't decide to help him and think, okay, I'm going to turn it back. He's only been evil for a bit. I'll redeem him. He thinks, no, I'm going to leave him to burn. He doesn't even finish him off, like give him a quick death because he's his old Padawan. He lets him burn to death like a sadistic person. At least the Emperor comes along and saves him. Obi-Wan Kenobi leaves his former Padawan to burn, which is one of the most horrible deaths you can have. It's shocking. It's shocking that he would do that. Why didn't he at least, use his saber to cut his head off and think, okay, I had to put him down. If you have a dog that you've loved for years, and then he suddenly goes a bit rabid and you have to put him down, you give him a lethal injection, you put him down. You don't burn him alive, you don't put him in the oven. How does that happen? But on the whole, I did enjoy episode 3. I thought General Grievous, although a bit of a character who was put in just for the cool factor because he had 4 lightsabers spinning around, I did enjoy General Grievous. I don't quite get the cough. I feel like there should have been more to that. I thought the cough was like, is there like a backstory here? I wish they'd explained that more. Maybe it was there and I'd forgotten about it. Although Obi-Wan Kenobi did kill him with a blaster, and then he said, so uncivilized, and yet, well, yes, it's uncivilized, but its blaster just saved your life. Okay, so episode 3 is a bit like, I really enjoy episode 3, but it does have its problems. Episode 2 I thought was dreadfully boring until the second half, then it got a bit better just for action. The Phantom Menace is kind of like, it's got all those core principles that make a good Star Wars film, but the acting was bland. So that's how I feel about the prequels. I do not hate them. I don't think they've ruined Star Wars. I do enjoy them, but they do have their problems. And I think even people who like them see those problems. So now, my favourite Star Wars film, Episode 4 A New Hope, or just Star Wars when it first came out. The reason I really like Episode 4 is because it feels like a self-contained story. It's not trying to be part of a bigger picture, although it does create a very interesting universe. Right from the beginning, you establish that there's this all-powerful empire and this small rebellion represented by the Star Destroyer ship and the small rebel ship. But on the whole, the series could have ended there. It could have ended there. I didn't want it to end there, but it could have done, because they'd blown up the Death Star. The Death Star was shown to be the ultimate seat of power for the Empire, and Darth Vader was seen flying off into space, which could have alluded to a sequel, but it didn't necessarily mean that. I mean, maybe it's just a good idea to keep Darth Vader alive. But it was all within itself. And you had some surprisingly dark things in this film. Alderaan, an entire planet with millions of people presumably living on it, or billions maybe, is blown up. You can't overstate killing that many people. You've got Darth Vader, who goes around choking people just for the fun of it. Well, not maybe for the fun of it, but he just thinks nothing of doing it. There are some bits in this film that are just a bit dark. And even on the Death Star, I mean, I'm sure there are loads of people on the Death Star who were just nice people doing their job. The Empire are shown as being this evil force, but the Empire could just be average citizens. You know, you could just, oh, I'm going to sign up for the Empire and go on the Death Star. Oh, I've got my best promotion ever. Oh no, these people are coming around and they're blowing me up. You know, they weren't all evil on the Death Star. But that aside, on the whole, a very good film. It's difficult to say why it's good because it very much speaks for itself. And of course, a lot of it is about how technically accomplished it was for its time. I can't speak to that too much, not being there at the time and not being able to fully appreciate it, but it's nice seeing things that aren't necessarily CG. You've got a lot of miniatures. I believe that's how they would have done the Death Star itself and the trench, and you've got the Star Destroyer and the little ship. A lot of it done through miniatures and puppeteering. Practical effects is what I'm trying to get at there. I mean, the sound design, they made classic stuff in this. The lightsaber sound effect, the laser sound effect, the Death Star charging sound effect, Darth Vader's respirator sound. These are all such classic sounds now. Like, if you hear them, you just, Star Wars, you know where that comes from, and that all originated here. I also think that C-3PO was a genuinely good comic relief character. Jar Jar Binks is an example of a terrible one. C-3PO was, you know, he's quite funny. He's just a bumbling, slightly camp robot. It's quite funny. He didn't do stupid stuff just for the sake of being stupid. He was quite funny, you know, overly quaint, like a British butler. And on the whole, it was very good. The only thing that I would criticise, but it's totally understandable, is how lame the lightsaber fight is between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader. Because I watched them in order, you had that really long, epic fight between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin in episode 3, and in this you've got a bit of swinging, and then Obi-Wan gives up. Considering how much he's been through, to give up then just seems like, I guess he was doing it so he could join with Luke and help him out later on, but it felt like defeatist, like it's meant to be, oh, I'm the bigger man, I'm not going to kill you, but I've not always quite got that. I wondered if they were just doing it so they didn't have to show an old man getting decapitated. I'm not entirely certain. But let's move away. Episode 4, thoroughly enjoyed to this day. The fact it stands up so well, like, I'm not just saying this as it's pretty good considering it came out back then. It's still really enjoyable to watch. Really recommend it even to this day. And then you have The Empire Strikes Back. A lot of people consider this their favourite film. For me, really enjoyable film, but not exactly my favourite, I'd say. I can see why, though. It's got the darker theme because it ends where the heroes haven't actually come out on top. The heroes are down one. I mean, Luke's had his hand chopped off. He's learned that this evil monster is actually his father, and Han Solo's been taken away and he's been put in carbonite, and now Jabba the Hutt's got him. Actually, that's an interesting thing just to talk about all these films, and this is a really big difference from the prequels. Each of the characters is very well done. The acting isn't necessarily believable, realistic, super true to life, but it is well defining. You get a real understanding of who these people are. You get the Han Solo's like the roguish type, Princess Leia's like the proper royal type, Luke Skywalker's sort of like an everyman, if you will. He doesn't try to be anything exactly because that's sort of who you are. That's who the audience is wanting to be, the vicarious experience. Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Ben Kenobi is also known in this, he's obviously the wise man. You've got C-3PO, the comic relief. You just get a real sense of who these characters are. You don't need to be spoon-fed. You just get them. You know, everything from the way they are portrayed visually to how they speak, you instantly know what they're about, and that is fantastic. So yeah, back to Empire Strikes Back. I also thought Darth Vader was better realised in his film. In the last one, he's got an intimidating presence, but in this one, he's a real bastard, basically. You know, there's moments he'll just think nothing of choking his commanders through like the telecommunicator just because they've slightly messed up a bit. There's also the fantastic opening scene on Hoth. That is just amazing, with the giant AT-AT walkers. And it's no wonder that Star Wars Battlefront is planning to focus on that battle, because it's just so iconic. It's incredible with how they get the speeders to kind of zoom around them and knock them over. It's just very creative. It looks amazing. It's a creative idea, and it sort of looks like World War II in space in a sense. And you get, the stakes are very high, and you instantly see that the rebels are on the run in a sense, and that's very much the theme of The Empire Strikes Back by virtue of its very name. The rebels are not succeeding, even though they've blown up the first Death Star. They're hardly out of the woods yet. Empire Strikes Back is trying to build a greater mythos. It's clearly not its own contained story. Without Return of the Jedi, it wouldn't work. You've also got Yoda, and for a puppet, wow. You look at a lot of old films that use puppets and stuff, you just think, oh, how goofy is that? It looks ridiculous, it looks terrible. But the Yoda puppet in these films is, you know what, it's not bad. There's a good amount of articulation on it. It doesn't look convincing as a real thing, obviously, you can tell. But it isn't bad, it really isn't too bad. And if anything, this slightly less sheeny look makes him look older than his previous CGI self in the prequels. If you've watched the original version of the Phantom Menace, they use a puppet version of Yoda, and it looks so goofy. But this version looks like a billion times better. It's crazy. So, now moving on to the final film, Return of the Jedi. And I really do like this film. It's got a lot of great iconic moments in it. But I have to say, I don't like the beginning of it. I felt it to be a bit slow. Jabba's palace is just... I found it a bit grungy. You also have to bear in mind I've watched the special edition with the crazy CGI dancing aliens. It looks really odd, and it breaks the theme a bit. But I thought it just began a bit slow compared to Empire Strikes Back, where you've immediately got Luke being knocked off his, I think they're tauntauns, and dragged into the cave by the Wampa. And then you've got the massive scene with the AT-ATs. In this, it takes a bit more time to get to the barge with the Sarlacc pit. Luke Skywalker has become like a proper Jedi by this point. He's actually a bit dark himself. He's wearing all black, and I think he actually chokes the pig guards at Jabba's palace. And I remember getting confused when I first saw that. I was like, wait, is he evil now? Has he gone to the dark side? But he's sort of, after having his hand cut off, he's sort of like a bit of an in-between in this film. He is a Jedi, but he's also sort of bordering on not the dark side, but what's a lighter version of the dark side? I don't know, the emo side for a bit of this film. He's not quite the dark side, but there's a darker look to him, and he's more professional about being a Jedi, I guess. When they get to Endor, the action starts to ramp up a bit, but admittedly now at my age, seeing the Ewoks fighting the Empire seems a bit ridiculous, because you've seen the Empire in these proper full-on battles. They're clearly very competent, but when they're getting bested by these little bears and their very primitive contraptions, it is a bit like, well, you know, these guys took out a rebel base. Why are these little bear things, these little Ewoks, causing them any kind of trouble? And I think the most classic, for me, the most iconic scene of the whole of Star Wars is with Luke and the Emperor and Darth Vader all in that seat of power within the second Death Star. And the Emperor is essentially trying to tempt Luke into moving to the dark side, but he says, no, I won't kill him. Although the fact he throws his lightsaber away seems somewhat careless. Like, okay, don't kill him, but it doesn't mean you have to throw your weapon away. I mean, the Emperor... I guess actually until that point, you might have assumed that the Emperor is not powerful. When you first see the Emperor, he might just seem like he's an old, decrepit bad guy, and that he does pose no threat, but the moment he starts shooting his evil force lightning, he's like, oh wait a second, this guy's actually really powerful. And the Emperor himself is a hugely iconic character, almost as iconic as Darth Vader himself. And it's nice to have the redemption storyline of him finally saying, no, I'm not going to watch my son be tortured in front of me, because, you know, that is pretty evil even by his standards. So he picks up the Emperor and throws him down a pit. I always thought, considering how powerful the Emperor has been built up to be, just literally hauling him, picking him up and chucking him down a pit seems like a fairly ridiculous way to go, considering how powerful he's supposed to be. But then again, it's a good ending. It's a good storyline. A good redemption storyline is always entertaining. So I think that sums it up. I am a great lover of Star Wars, and although I do like the Star Wars films, I'm really more into the general universe, the mythos. I've played so many of the Star Wars games. I've watched a lot of the extended universe stuff. Everything just is so appealing to me. I think appealing to obviously a lot of people, and I certainly don't think that the prequels ruin Star Wars. They obviously have their flaws. As I say, the Phantom Menace is some disturbingly bland acting, but on the whole, I'm a big fan of Star Wars, and so I thought it would be nice just to do this video casually going through each of them, talking about Star Wars and why I enjoy it. And I think the thing is, sometimes the things we really do enjoy are the things that we tend to find more faults with because we're more invested in them. So someone who really doesn't like Star Wars, who doesn't care about it, isn't going to look for the little things because they've just dismissed it. Someone who really enjoys Star Wars is going to be more, perhaps, aggravated by these small little inconsistencies because the grander picture is so appealing. And I think that's why a lot of the greater fans of Star Wars, like the true hardcore fans, have things against, like, you know, adding these extra scenes into the original trilogy. For example, the thing in Jabba Palace with the dancing CGI aliens. Yep, that is ridiculous. I'm not too fussed by that. I think the overall story is still preserved. You've got that argument, who shot first, Han or Greedo? I'm not even going to go there. But, yep, big fan of Star Wars. Hope you are too. As always, people, thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.